Welcome again to our course on the entrepreneur, and I hope you're enjoying this training course. This is number 3 in the series, and this is all about process. So just before we get into it, let's just recap as to where we're going and to what we've actually covered already. So let's have a look at the process of that. So that's the idea of why we're going and where we've been. And just to remind you where we've been, we talked about what is an entrepreneur, and then we've talked about what's inside you. And today I'm talking about the need for process. First of all, there's a couple of slides here that just clarify things. I'm sure you know these things, but let me give you some dictionary definitions of some important things that we're going to look at. So here we are, vital principles, and I'm sure you can read. So on your left you've got the vitals, and on the right you've got what it means to be principled. Vision, and that's a little bit about what I'm covering today, always has priority over money or lack of it. Let me say that again. Our vision ought to have priority over money or lack of it. Principle number 1. Even though you look at some well-known entrepreneurs, we have highlighted through the course so far, and we will continue to highlight those who are wealthy financially, not one of them, as far as I know, ever made money their goal. In the aftermath of the success of their vision, obviously many of them did in fact become very rich. Some millionaires, some billionaires, some trillionaires. And they've created thousands of jobs for other people. But right at the beginning, their vision was not about money. But there's not a lot of discussion in many of these kind of courses that talk about being an entrepreneur, and I hope you want to be one, but there's not an awful lot of discussion about when these people didn't have any money. And here's a picture for you of a very well-known person in the job centre. And then we've got Lord Sugar. My researcher says that he was started off with the Amstrad computers. I don't know how, depends how old you are, whether you can even remember Amstrad computers. I do. But actually, Lord Sugar did not start his entrepreneurial activity with Amstrad computers. He actually started by selling firewood out of an old pram while he was at the top of his school, or just before he left school. And he started selling firewood out of an old pram, and he made lots of money. The vision is more important than the money. Often, to be an entrepreneur, we need to be willing to lose money in order to gain people. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit later on about risk. Just recently, I've been reading some other stuff on being an entrepreneur, and one of the articles that I read said that entrepreneurs is not a risk business. I'm sorry, I disagree. I think if you're not willing to live in risk, then you're probably not going to be an entrepreneur. Just to come back to the Bible, do you think that Jesus didn't know that Judas Iscariot was stealing money from the team that he was running? If you go to the Bible, you'll see that Judas was the treasurer of the disciples, if you like, and he was stealing money along the way. Do you think that Jesus didn't know that? I think he did. But Jesus always was willing to lose money to gain people. Vital principle number 2, people have priority over profit. Now, profit's a funny thing. I've talked to some very top accountants who tell me that in reality they don't know what profit is, because they can always show a loss for anything. That's a really strange concept. And if you talk to accountants, they will tell you that. But the reality is that profit, if without making money, you won't have anything to give away, to bless anybody else, to help anybody else, to help your project, to put towards your vision. So unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, money is important. But if money is the basic bottom line principle for the vision, then you're missing it. And my guess is that you won't make it. I've listened to people who say, I want to be an entrepreneur. Why do you want to be an entrepreneur? I want to be a millionaire. I want to be a billionaire. If that is the aim, my guess is, and I've talked to some of these people, they do not make it. If making money is bigger than the vision, then you've lost it. So we shouldn't think in terms of how do we maximize profit, which is sadly the way that many big corporate entities exist. It's the bottom line. It's the bottom line. That's not the bottom line. What we should do is be considering how we can not only make a profit, we need to do that, as I've already said, but we need to know how we can make other people's lives better, improve them. We need to practice what I call the gleaning principle. And that again goes back to the Bible. In the Old Testament, you'll find there was a command that when people reaped the fields of wheat or corn or whatever it is that they were growing, they were to leave the edges of the field for the poorer people to come and pick it up so that they didn't starve. So they had something as well. So the idea was you don't maximize your profit, you limit the profit so that other people are blessed. We need to make sure that there's something for those who can't afford the product. Not yet. Interesting on that one. Henry Ford, when he first started making motor cars, he realized that some of his workers couldn't afford the cars that they were making. So he put their salaries up so that they could afford to buy the cars that they were making. That's a very interesting concept. We're in a company that is in contract with local authorities, and we look after what's euphemistically called UAMs, unaccompanied asylum seekers, minors, children of 16 and 17 that are in the United Kingdom without parents or guardians. And we get paid for doing that. The local authority funds us. However, one day, here's my story. Do you like stories? Well, here's my story. One day the phone rings and it's the local authority. We have a young lady in our care, and the local authority said, I'm very sorry, but we can no longer pay you for this young lady. She has to go to NAS. Now, NAS stands for the National Asylum Service. And actually, it's a very sad thing when a youngster in the country has to go to NAS. And frankly, their accommodation is not nice. And I don't actually think that they always get looked after to the level that they really should. So we said, we'd had this young lady living in one of our properties for a long time. And we said, never mind, we will keep the young lady. No, said the local authority, you can't do that. Why not? Because we can't pay you. Yes, we've understood that you can't pay us. We will keep the young lady. I reckon that local authority must have phoned us about 7 or 8 times and explained to us that they couldn't pay us. And we kept saying, yes, we know, you've already told us that. You've already explained it. So, what are you going to do? Well, we said, we're keeping her. But who's going to pay? Said they. Well, we said, we'll pay. Who's going to buy her food? We will buy her food. Who's going to pay the accommodation costs? We will pay the accommodation costs. Then the lady at the end of the line said to us, but nobody does that. Oh dear, said we, but we do, was the answer. Interesting, we kept that young lady for 3 weeks, and we did pay all the bills. And after 3 weeks, the government department changed their mind, changed their whole system and said, we've decided that this young lady can stay in the UK after all, and we think we ought to pay you. Now, we did not know that at the beginning of those 3 weeks, and we were willing to continue for as long as it was necessary. We had to find the money from somewhere else. But the principle was we were willing to keep people rather than make money. Not that making money is a problem. Okay, here's another of those rags to riches one. He started with £100 that he borrowed as a deposit to buy a one-bedroom conversion that cost him £4,500. In 1981, he founded, and some of you will have heard of it if you live in the UK, Foxton's Estate Agents, with an old school friend. It's one of the most salubrious estate agents in the UK. So that's how he started. The problem is with these things is that we see these entrepreneurs at the end of their journey and we forget there was a beginning, and sometimes some of them were on the dole, they had no money, they were struggling. I think that we need, if we're going to be an entrepreneur, we need to have faith if we want an entrepreneurial approach. We need to understand history, where we came from and where we are going. I suppose it's possible to be selfish, a selfish entrepreneur who just does things for money alone, but when you have faith in God, there are things that He gives us which comes from nowhere else. That might sound strange to some of you, but that's me doing the lecture, and you've got to take where I'm coming from. And I understand that God has a principle that says if we are part of Him and He's in us, we can do all things. And that's a strange thing. Now, sometimes people say that in a funny sort of way. That doesn't mean to say I can fly to America without an airline ticket. But there are things that we can do. I've spent a lot of my life, when people tell me things that were impossible to do. And then I think, yes, but I already did that. So you're telling me it's impossible, but it's done. So that is a very good application. Faith in God teaches me that there's all sorts of things that are possible that lots of other people say are impossible. We will say it again later on in the course, but again, to quote Henry Ford, he said, when everybody shouts it's impossible, that drives him mad, because he said nobody knows those real answers. Here's another rags to riches person. Mike Ashley is apparently worth about 2.1 billion. He started with a £10,000 loan. He left school at 16. He started as a squash coach, teaching squash. He opened his first ski and sports shop in Maidenhead in the 1980s and is now worth 2.1 billion. We need to ask the question, and we will constantly refer to this during the course, what is inside you? And number one, I want to know, is there a risk factor inside you? I think that all ventures are risk factors. Now, as I said earlier on, there are some people these days who are saying, no, entrepreneurs don't take risks. I think that is not true. Okay, let's have a look at what the word venture means. So you can see that on the slide there. It's a risky or daring journey undertaken, pioneering ventures into little-known waters. Okay, you can read the slide just as well as me. So, venture. Let's move on to 5 of the biggest entrepreneurial risks. Risk number 1, there is a chance of suffering heavy losses. Financially, socially, reputationally. Recession, for an example. We're in the middle at the moment of the COVID thing, and it's affected all sorts of businesses. You can't write that into the script when you're venturing a new product. Nobody knew that was coming. Well, in some ways people did know, but anyway, that's another story. Sometimes the product that you've made or the thing that you've invented doesn't get sold in the market as the purchasing power of individual people goes down. Markets fluctuate. Markets do not always remain stable. They go up and down. Many factors cause this. Very often, if you're an entrepreneur, you've got a loan somewhere up the road. People have all sorts of ideas on that. But it's usually there is a debt somewhere or a loan. You've borrowed money to invest in that vision. Often he or she suffers losses and is unable to pay up the loans. Debts can cause awful worries. If you're in a big business, strikes, illness, production hold-ups, staff go on strike. Many years ago, I had purchased a very big building and invested an awful lot of money, well over £1 million. And I know that running that building, my vision was to see it completed and working in a particular way. And I knew I'd done all my homework, because being an entrepreneur doesn't mean to say you don't think things through. I'd done all the work and I knew that there was a special program that was running. I would have made a profit even refurbishing the building. And then one day I was driving my car and listening to the news, and Mrs. Thatcher made an announcement, and I realised that was the end of my project. And I am now about to lose an awful lot of money. I did, in fact, lose over £1 million. You can't write the script always. The vision is there, the risk is there, and sometimes things that you could not potentially see happen. I don't know what you do. I know what I did. Just kept going. We didn't ever complete that building, but it, we lost all that money, but my credit is still good. Sometimes the competition gets you, so that other people are bringing their products onto market and they are competing with you, better price, whatever. And sometimes a bigger company has more money to advertise and they're affecting what you do. So entrepreneurial venture is not without risk. If it's without risk, let me tell you, it's probably not a venture at all. I think actually entrepreneurs like taking risks. He or she gets a thrill in venturing into unknown domains. So, what's inside you? The risk factor, and now the Babel Principle. Now, what is the Babel Principle? There's an interesting one. In the Old Testament, there's this story about the Tower of Babel. And the Bible actually says that God came down to look at the tower to see what was going on. And there's a whole little verse that people miss. You can read the Bible and you miss certain things and you think, oh, that's really interesting when you sort of dig into it and look at it a bit further. God comes down and the Bible records that God says these things. He says, these, and I'll read it out to you, behold, they are one unified people, and they have all the same language. This is only the beginning of what they will do in rebellion against me, and now no evil thing they imagine they can do. Nothing will be impossible for them. That's in Genesis chapter 11, right at the beginning of the Bible. Now, I've taken from that little story some principles which I want to share with you. So maybe you've never heard about the Babel theory before. As far as an entrepreneur is concerned, you're going to hear it tonight from me. So, first of all, God says there is unity of communication. Communicating thoroughly and effectively is an incredible, important, valuable thing to an entrepreneur. We've been living through a COVID situation, and one of the big complaints about the government is that their communication to the general populace has been not very good at all. Communication in any venture of an entrepreneur is important. It's valuable. And God looks at these people and he says, they have good communication. They all understand each other. Secondly, he says, there is a unity of vision for these people. They've got a vision in mind. They are planning to do something and they're all agreed. Now, if you've got division in a vision, and the reality is an entrepreneur usually, I would say 100%, most of the time cannot do things by themselves. We need people with us. We need other people to share our vision, to get on board, to agree with us and say, yes, that's a great idea. That's where we're going. And those people help you, if you're an entrepreneur, to fulfill the vision. And where there is a unity, everybody's agreed, yes, that's the direction we're going, then something really happens. There is a plan. They're building a tower, okay? If you're an entrepreneur and you've got no vision, and you've got vision, but you've got no plan, you're at sea in a boat and you've got no paddle. The reality is you need a plan, and the plan needs to be small steps to the larger vision that you plan. And this is what God says concerning those people with their good communication, unity of vision. They've got a plan, and he says, above all things are in place. Nothing will be impossible to them. That's God, if you like, that was God's point of view to entrepreneurs who had a vision. Now, I don't think their vision was particularly good, and God was sort of saying it's not a wholesome vision, but God was saying because they have unity of communication, vision, and a plan, anything is possible. These people can do anything. So what's inside you? The risk factor, the Babel Principle, I hope you got hold of that. And another one, your thought control. What do you let into your mind? Here's again, I'd like to quote the Bible here. And this is what the Bible says. Whatsoever things are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, good report. If there's any virtue, think about these things. You know, I think that sometimes we allow a lot of rubbish into our heads. Somebody said, you can't stop birds flying around your head. No, you can't, but you can stop them nesting on your head. So thoughts will come from anywhere, but we don't have to keep them. So what is in your thinking? Here you are. Please excuse the mess, because my thinking is in a lot of trouble and I'm trying to renovate. You can read that for me. Life transformation is possible through the renewing of your mind. I often ask people, how do you change what you are? Or if you like, put it another way, how does God, what is the methodology that God uses to change people? Oftentimes, people of faith will talk about change, and they talk about things like, well, God changed me. Okay, if he did, how did he do it? Well, basically, he changed their thinking. If you change your thinking, you eventually change your actions. Everything starts in the mind. It's all like that. You know, we moved our offices one day, and one of the funny things that happened was that my car drove to the wrong offices every morning for at least a week. I got very angry with my car. No, I'm joking, of course. The reality is that I'd done that so many times that I just kept doing the same thing, and I'd sit outside. I'd even park the jolly car and think, why have you come here? This isn't your office anymore. And I'd have to go and drive out and reverse out and go to the right place. The problem is that we are used to doing things reactively. So we learn a thing and we do it. You know, when you start to drive a car, you're thinking gears, steering wheel, mirror, blah. When you've driven for a long time, you do all those things, but you don't think about them. But you do really, because your mind is controlling your actions. So if you want mindset to be different, you have to change your mind, renew your mind, and then you think in a different way. And I'm telling you, if you do that, you'll act in a different way. Here's another one. What do you talk to yourself about? Now, when I was younger, of course, before the advent of mobile phones, and you saw people walking down the street talking to themselves, you knew that actually they'd got a mental problem. Nowadays, you see everybody's walking down the street talking to themselves, and you go, oh, they're not talking to themselves, they're on the phone, and I just can't see the leads in their ears and on their mouth. From my point of view, it still looks very strange. But I think it's good for us sometimes to talk to ourselves. What do you talk to yourself about? What do you say about yourself? What do you think about yourself? The Bible's got another little phrase. It says, as a person thinks, so is he. Now, the thing is, if you think you're ugly, you're probably ugly. If you think you're good looking, you're probably good looking. If you think you're bright, you're probably bright. If you think you're stupid, you will be stupid. What do you say to yourself? You know, some people do that as a sort of morning exercise. So they look in the mirror and say, you're going to have a good day. Now, I'm not sure as all of that works, but actually our body does listen to us. I often say to people who say, oh, I'm always tired. Well, if you keep saying, I'm tired, your body thinks, he wants to be tired, so I'm going to be tired, and you'll feel tired. If you don't say those things, and that you could take that too far, of course, but if you use positive words to yourself, we need to understand that words have power. And the things that we say actually have an effect. Sometimes we often say things like, I wish I hadn't have said that. Well, the problem is you have, and it's gone forward, and that power of the words is there. So words of anger and bitterness, and difficulty, they're destructive. People, you know, the old tune that kids used to say, sticks and stones will break my bones, but none of those words will harm me. Actually, words do harm people. The big thing, of course, in the social media at the moment is that people are being attacked in social media. It's words, and words have an effect. The trouble is that if you hear words that are negative and so on, that's really difficult. I know a guy he's very much an entrepreneur, and he's very much a big public speaker. And one day, well, it's happened more than once, he would phone me and say, oh, dear me. He said, somebody came to me after my speech today and told me how awful I was and how terrible it was and how much they thought that I was not on target. And he said, I'm really bothered about it. I would usually ask him the same question. How many people were there? Oh, it was about 1,000. And how many others said that? Oh, there was just the one. Isn't that funny how we take on board the negative? So you listen to one person that's negative, and there's, I don't know, 900 other people go, he was fantastic. That was really helpful. That was really useful. But we listen to the one negative. Don't do that. Listen to the positive. Recognise that if people don't like you, there's probably the people that do. If people are saying bad things about you, they're not saying about somebody else. But in fact, there's probably lots of other people thinking good things about you. You can change your world by changing your words. Again, to quote the Bible, it says, remember, death and life are in the power of the tongue. So what we say, not just to other people, but to ourselves, is incredibly important. Here's another rags to riches one, and my researcher this time, Richard Branson, started off with £300. And he said he started with a small mail order record shop. Actually, he didn't. And so my researcher has pulled these things out of the history. But in fact, he started, Richard Branson, who's now a multi-billionaire. What's he worth? 3.8 billion. And these are probably out of date. It's probably worth more than that now. But in reality, he started by selling a youth magazine, and he couldn't even afford a phone. It was the days before mobile phones. And what happened was he used the phone box number outside of where he was living. And every time that phone box rang, he would run out and answer the phone and pretend that it was such and such a magazine. That's what he started doing. That's how he began. And he's now worth 3.8 billion a year. Okay, I've got another one that you don't hear from lots of entrepreneurs, but I like this one. It's what I call the stupidity factor. I didn't know it was impossible, and so I went and did it. And I've got this quote, and I've got it on my office wall actually, from George Bernard Shaw. He says, unreasonableness, okay? The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. I don't know about you, but I like sometimes people say, you can't do that. And I say, well, I'm too stupid to know that I can't. There's something about the stupidity factor. I don't know whether this is true, but I like this one. According to all known laws of aviation, there is no way a bee should be able to fly. Its wings are too small to get its fat little body off the ground. The bee, of course, flies anyway because bees don't care what human beings think. That was said by Jack Black in 2015. Now, I don't know whether it's true, but it actually is. It's really interesting that the amount of times that people say to me, that can't be done. And I go, but I already finished doing it. Okay. I hope you've understood a little bit about the process, moving from one stage to another. Next time, we're going to look at the practical progress of process, because process has a progress. Have a good evening or have a good day. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've learned something fun from this third section of The Entrepreneur. See you next time.